For years after our wedding, my husband Michael had prohibited me from going back to the small town to visit his mother's home. His excuse was always the same. They were in the middle of a massive, long-term renovation. Then one day, a piece of news arrived that was as shocking as it was devastating. My mother-in-law, Rose, had passed away a month earlier. When Michael had to leave the city for a week-long business trip, I made a decision. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I decided to travel in secret to the town, to see the house that Rose Miller, my mother-in-law, had left behind. But the moment I opened the front door, I froze. My body trembled, the air caught in my chest, and I understood instantly that what lay behind that door was far darker than I could have ever imagined. No one suspected that this story was, in fact, my life. My name is Amina. I had been married to Michael for 8 years. 8 years that, to any outside observer, looked pretty good. We lived in a comfortable, split-level home in the suburbs of a major city. Michael was a regional manager at a logistics company, a stable position with a solid salary. And I, a woman with a gentle disposition who wore a hijab, had chosen to dedicate myself entirely to the home after we married. Our life seemed like one many people would envy. Bills paid, a tidy house, a marriage free of shouting or scandal. Yet, behind that calm facade, there was a persistent thorn stuck in my heart, one single place that remained a locked door to me. The house of Rose Miller, Michael's mother, in the quiet town of Hope Springs. In 8 years of marriage, I had only seen my mother-in-law 3 times. Twice at the beginning, when Rose traveled to the city to meet me, and a third time in our first year of marriage when we went to the town. I remembered Rose as a quiet woman with a soft, serene gaze. She didn't talk much, but the way she would gently rub my back when she hugged me felt profoundly sincere. I genuinely wanted to know the woman who had brought the man I loved into the world, to build a relationship of affection and trust with her. But starting in the 2nd year of our marriage, that door slammed shut. For the past 7 years, every time I suggested going to Hope Springs to visit Rose, Michael gave the same answer. Mom's house is under full renovation, honey. It's a major job. We should wait until they finish. The first time, the explanation sounded reasonable. Michael told me the house, which had been left to his mother after his father's death, was falling apart. Rotting beams, severe leaks, foundation issues that needed reinforcement. As an only child, he felt fully responsible. I want Mom to live her final years in a dignified house, he told me. At the time, I felt nothing but pride for having such a thoughtful husband and a good son. I supported him without reservation. The first year, the excuse held up. By the 2nd year, I started to wonder what kind of construction could possibly last so long. Michael kept adding new problems. It turns out the lot is unstable. We had to redo part of the work. And the contractors are a disaster. They never meet deadlines, he would grumble with a tone of annoyance that made me feel guilty for even bringing it up. By the 3rd, 4th, and 5th years, that renovation became a bitter joke that only I was privy to. Every time Eid al-Fitr came around, I would prepare the best gift for Rose, but Michael would always take it alone. This way I can keep an eye on the crew. Besides, the drive is long, you'd get tired. It's dusty there, and it's not good for your breathing, he would say sweetly. I was obedient by nature. I just nodded and sent warm greetings to my mother-in-law. Eventually, I stopped asking, not because I didn't care, but because every question hit the same wall. The endless remodel. Michael's reluctance to go into detail created a subtle, but constant distance between us. In every other way, he remained a good husband. Attentive, always careful to call when he traveled, and never neglecting my needs. But the moment I mentioned Rose or the house in the town, Michael would become defensive and guarded, as if someone had suddenly turned off the light in his eyes. For a while, I tried to keep in touch with Rose by phone. At first she would answer. Her voice sounded weak but affectionate. Whenever I asked her when we could come visit, Rose would respond with a resigned whisper, "Ask Michael, dear. I just do what he tells me." But for the last 2 years, that number stopped responding. Her old flip phone finally broke. You know, she's older. It's hard for her to learn a new one. Plus, there's hardly any signal out in the country, Michael explained. Again, it sounded logical, but something in my stomach clenched every time I heard it. It was like smelling smoke, but never seeing the fire. The suspicion truly exploded 3 months before the attorney's visit. That day, during a late summer drought, the city air was dry and full of dust. Michael had just returned from one of his business trips that, he claimed, included a visit to Hope Springs to check on the progress of the renovations. He arrived late at night, exhausted. I walked to the door to help him take off his shoes, as I always did. As I took his leather loafers, I froze. They weren't covered in dust. They were caked in thick, wet, red mud, as if he had crossed a freshly soaked field after a heavy rain. "Michael, where did you step in so much mud?" I asked softly, trying to keep my voice neutral. Michael, who was loosening his tie, went completely still. The fatigue on his face tightened, and his eyes darted to his shoes for a second before looking away. It was at a friend's construction site near Mom's house. "Work stuff," he answered too quickly. "But we're in the middle of a drought. Where did this fresh mud come from?" I insisted, not intending to accuse him, just confused. For the first time in 8 years, he yelled at me. "You are so distrustful. I come home shattered from working all day, and you interrogate me about a pair of shoes? Have I ever lied to you about anything? I only go to that town for my mother. Do you think I enjoy the commute? You should appreciate my effort more." His voice was harsh, cutting. I felt my eyes fill with tears. He had never spoken to me like that. I set the shoes down with trembling hands. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "Forget it," he interrupted, walking into the bathroom and closing the door behind him. That night, I slept with my back to him. I cried silently, not so much because of the shouting, but because of the sharp taste of lies in Michael's response. He was hiding something big that involved the town, Rose, and that endless renovation that had erected an invisible wall between me and my husband's family. I understood for the first time that our marriage was not fine, as I had constantly told myself. It had a deep crack, and that crack was rooted in that house in the country that no one would let me see. The following days, everything seemed to return to normal, but it was a forced normalcy. After the shoe incident, Michael became especially attentive. He bought me a new designer tunic, took me out to an expensive restaurant, and showered me with compliments and gifts. I accepted everything with a pale smile. I knew it was his way of apologizing, of trying to cover a fault line he himself had created with presents. I let him, not because I was convinced, but because I felt too exhausted to argue. I began to observe him in silence with a new clarity, as if I were living with a stranger who desperately needed to be deciphered. One Saturday morning, as I was arranging homemade pastries on a platter in the kitchen, Michael was reading the newspaper on the deck. The day was quiet until a car horn broke the silence. I looked out the window and saw a gleaming black sedan stop in front of the house. I didn't recognize the car. A well-dressed man in a gray suit and a leather briefcase stepped out. He checked his phone screen to confirm the address and rang the doorbell. I adjusted my hijab and walked toward the door just as Michael stood up, frowning. "Can I help you, sir?" Michael asked with strained politeness. "Good morning. Are you Mr. Michael Miller?" "Yes, that's me. Allow me to introduce myself. I am Mr. Thompson from Thompson and Associates. I am here regarding an important matter concerning." He paused, glancing at me, where I stood slightly behind my husband, at Rose Miller. My heart sank. My mother-in-law's name appearing on the lips of an attorney could only mean bad news. Michael immediately turned pale. The composure he usually maintained dropped from his face like a paper mask. "What about my mother?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It would be better if we spoke inside," the lawyer proposed. "It's a very private matter." Michael, rigid with tension, waved him in. I followed, my hands cold. In the living room, I hurried to bring them water, though my hands were shaking so much the glasses rattled on the tray. When I returned, Mr. Thompson had already started. "Mr. Miller, Mrs. Miller," he said formally. "I am here as the legal representative designated by Mrs. Rose Miller. May she rest in peace." I nearly dropped the tray. "Rest in peace," I whispered, as if the words couldn't possibly be real. I looked at Michael, searching for an explanation, but he was motionless, staring at the coffee table. The lawyer took a deep breath. "I am very sorry. Rose passed away 32 days ago at the town hospital due to acute renal failure. According to the instructions she left me in writing, I was to contact you, Mr. Miller, as the sole heir, exactly 30 days after her passing to address the issue of the estate. His voice was neutral, almost as if he were reading a weather report. My ears were ringing. 32 days. More than a month. My mother-in-law had died and I knew nothing. I, her daughter-in-law, hadn't been at the burial or the viewing. I hadn't even offered a prayer for her on the day of her death. It was an absence that weighed on me like guilt. Michael seemed to crumble. He covered his face with both hands and began to sob. His shoulders shook. The crying seemed heart-wrenching. I looked at him with a cold detachment. I struggled to believe it. I had seen his lies before. The lawyer, uncomfortable, opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick brown envelope and a keyring with several old-fashioned keys. Mr. Miller, he said, sliding the envelope toward him. According to the validated will and testament, all assets in your mother's name, including the house and property in Hope Springs, are legally transferred to you. Here are the property deeds, already in your name. And these, he pointed to the keys, are the keys to the house in town. I stared at those keys as if they were pieces of cursed metal, the key to all the secrets. When the attorney left, leaving behind a crushing stillness, I finally spoke. My voice was flat, frozen. A month, Michael. He flinched. Your mother died a month ago, and you didn't tell me anything. It wasn't a question, it was a bare accusation. Michael looked up. In his eyes, the supposed grief now mixed with panic. Amina, I can explain. I was a wreck. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want you to suffer. You lied to me. I cut him off. You went to the town 3 months ago. Your shoes covered in mud. You weren't supervising construction, were you? You went because your mother was sick. He hesitated. Yes, Mom was sick. I took her to the hospital. I didn't want to worry you. And why didn't you tell me she died? I insisted, my voice cracking with rage and pain. I'm your wife. I was her daughter-in-law. I couldn't even say a prayer for her the day she was buried. That's exactly why. Michael exploded, standing up. I didn't want you to see her like that. The house was a mess. The renovation unfinished. I was ashamed. I didn't want you to remember my mother amidst a ruin. The renovation again. Even in the face of death, Michael hid behind the same pretense. He grabbed the envelope and the keys and locked himself in his home office. I heard the click of the desk drawer lock, securing those keys and, with them, all his secrets. I sank onto the couch, feeling an immense sorrow for Rose, a woman I barely knew, and an even deeper, more bitter grief for my marriage. That day, I finally understood that the man I had slept beside for 8 years was, in reality, a total stranger. 4 days passed after the attorney's visit, and they were the longest 4 days of our marriage. The house filled with a thick, almost tangible silence. Michael, after his dramatic outburst, now behaved like a heartbroken widower. He spent long periods staring at the blank television. He would get lost in thought when he believed I wasn't watching, but I watched everything, and the only thing I saw was fear. There was no real pain in his eyes, only nervousness, a preoccupation that his mask might slip. I transformed. Something in me broke, but something else hardened. I continued my duties. I made his coffee in the morning, cooked dinner, and washed his clothes, but I did it with an almost mechanical efficiency. No conversation, no smiles. I had become a spectator in my own home, studying Michael's every gesture, waiting for an opportunity. The opportunity came on the 5th day. During breakfast, Michael cleared his throat and set his spoon down with an overly calculated gesture. Amina, he said, adopting a grave tone. An urgent business trip has come up, a project in another region. I might be away for a week, maybe 10 days. I'm leaving early tomorrow. It was too perfect a coincidence. I felt a faint throbbing in my temples. My mother-in-law had been secretly dead for a month. And now, just as the inheritance materialized, he needed to disappear. Oh, was all I said, my voice icy. Michael looked uncomfortable. Perhaps he expected tears. Please not to leave me alone in my grief. I tried to say no, but my boss won't allow it. It's an important project. Will you be all right if I leave you alone? he asked, a thread of hope in his voice. "It'll be fine," I replied. "Go and finish your work, Michael." He seemed relieved, almost too relieved. "Thank you, my love. I'll call you every day, I promise." For the rest of the day, I watched him pack his suitcase. I saw him select shirts with an energy that didn't fit someone overwhelmed by mourning. I heard him humming while folding pants. I caught him smiling while looking at his phone. That smile chilled my blood. That night, Michael went to bed early, saying he needed to rest for the flight. I didn't sleep a wink. I lay rigid beside him, listening to his steady breathing and thinking that this man, the one who had shared my bed for 8 years, was living surrounded by lies so thick that I could no longer see through them. The sorrow had turned into a cold, pure rage that gave me strength. At 5 a.m., Michael's alarm went off. He moved quickly in the dim light, showered, dressed, grabbed his briefcase, and leaned over to kiss my forehead. I pretended to still be half asleep. His lips were cold on my skin. "I'm leaving now. Take care of the house," he whispered. I mumbled something indistinct. I heard the scrape of the suitcase, the front door opening and closing, the car engine starting, and then fading until silence consumed the house. Then I opened my eyes. I didn't wait a minute. I jumped out of bed. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the clear certainty that the moment had arrived. My target was Michael's office, forbidden territory, where he always made sure to lock up when he wasn't inside. The doorknob wouldn't turn, it was locked, as expected. I wasn't discouraged. I knew Michael was organized, but also vain and overconfident. He would never think I would dare to intrude. Where would he keep a spare key? I had an idea and ran to the laundry room where the basket with his used work pants from the previous week sat. I searched the pockets one by one. Nothing in the gray pants, nothing in the beige. In the black ones, my fingers touched something hard and cold in the small side pocket. I pulled out a tiny silver key. It was a drawer key. That gave me half a victory, but I still needed to get into the office. I slumped for a moment in the hallway, frustrated, turning the small key between my fingers. Then I looked toward the house entrance. There, on the typical key rack next to the door, hung the neatly organized reserve sets, car keys, front door keys, gate keys, and among them the office key. Michael was so sure of his superiority, he never imagined I would use them. With trembling hands, I took the spare key, returned to the office, and unlocked the door. The smell of the room hit me immediately, a mixture of expensive paper, expensive cologne, and power. Everything was impeccable. A mahogany desk, full bookshelves, a leather chair. I went straight for the desk, to the 3 drawers on the right. The top one didn't move. Locked. I inserted the tiny silver key. It fit perfectly. The drawer slid open silently. The first thing I saw was that old keyring, the keys the lawyer had left a few days earlier for the Hope Springs house. I picked them up. They were cold, heavy, with complex teeth. As I was about to close the drawer, I saw a blue file folder underneath. On the cover, written in Michael's neat hand, were the words, "Renovation Housetown." My heart hammered against my chest. I opened it. There were no blueprints or architect bids, just dozens, perhaps hundreds of receipts. Receipts for construction material purchases. 100 bags of cement, 5 trucks of sand, 50 iron bars, cans of paint, roofing tiles. All issued by the same city hardware store with dates carefully distributed at the end of every month for 7 years. It was too perfect, too symmetrical. It wasn't the real mess of a construction job, but the polished bookkeeping of a meticulously constructed lie. Tucked among the receipts, almost randomly, was a small note. A scrap of paper torn from a notebook, in a handwriting that wasn't Michael's. It was a nervous, slanting, clearly feminine script. It read, "Only. Her medicine ran out again. She needs it." I gripped the paper in my hand. What medicine? Who? The renovation no longer had anything to do with contractors. There was something much darker at play. I tucked the town keys into the inner pocket of my clothing, returned the file folder and the small key to their place, closed the drawer, the office, and hung the house keys back where they belonged. There was no trace of my intrusion. Standing in the living room, the cold keyring in my pocket, I felt my fear dissipate. All that was left inside was determination. I gave myself an hour to prepare. I couldn't risk Michael calling and perceiving anything strange in my voice. I had to sound normal. I showered. I performed the dawn prayer with forced concentration, all the while thinking about the keys hidden near my chest, and then I packed. I didn't take a suitcase, it would have drawn too much attention. I grabbed an old backpack I used for religious study classes and put in 2 long tunics, matching hijabs, underwear, a prayer mat, and most importantly, all the cash I had in my wallet and a secret drawer. I did not intend to use cards. Any bank movement could be traced. I grabbed my cell phone, hesitated for an instant, and reached a conclusion. If I turned it off, Michael would become suspicious and might decide to return early. I left it on silent mode. If he called, I simply wouldn't answer and would later text him some excuse. I was in the shower. I fell asleep. That would suffice. I used an app to call a cab to the intercity bus terminal, not the train station. Trains have more cameras, more records. The chaotic, noisy bus terminal was the best place to become invisible. The ride to the terminal felt surreal. Sitting in the back seat, I watched the city wake up. People rushing to work, children with backpacks heading to school, street vendors starting their day. I felt detached from my own life, as if, instead of being a quiet homemaker, I were a fugitive. But I wasn't fleeing the law, I was fleeing a lie. At the terminal, I bought an economy bus ticket to the closest city to Hope Springs, not to the town itself. I didn't want the exact destination name to appear in any register. I paid cash and took a seat by the window. The bus filled up quickly, smelling of a mixture of sweat, fast food, and diesel. I didn't mind. As the vehicle started, leaving the city's bustle behind, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was the first time in a long time I was out of the direct reach of Michael and his poisoned explanations. The trip lasted about 5 hours. 5 hours I spent watching the landscape scroll by. Buildings replaced by green fields, smog replaced by cleaner air, the dense city asphalt replaced by tree-lined country roads. In my head, the pieces were trying to fit together. Michael claimed the house was destroyed and under total renovation. Yet all the purchased material was supposedly kept in the city, according to the receipts. The note mentioned medicine. The lawyer said Rose had died in the hospital from a kidney problem. Was that true, or had Rose been agonizing at home? Who was the woman in the note, and for whom was that medicine intended? When the bus reached the county seat city, I got off and walked toward the area where the local shuttle vans waited. I asked a driver where I could get transport to Hope Springs. The man looked at me and replied, "Hope Springs? Sure, a blue shuttle leaves from over there. It's a well-known town." He pointed to the vehicle. I was surprised. It didn't seem like the remote, forgotten corner Michael always described. I boarded the shuttle, which was full of women returning from the farmer's market with baskets of produce. One of them, a kind-faced woman, sat beside me. A while later, I mustered the courage. "Excuse me, ma'am. Do you know where Rose Miller's house is?" I asked, keeping the details minimal. The woman immediately looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and compassion in her eyes. "Oh, bless her heart. And who are you to her?" "It's been over a month since she passed." I felt a lump in my throat and lied. "I'm distant family." I was too ashamed to say I was the daughter-in-law who hadn't even shown up for the viewing. "Well, you get off at the corner by the community center, keep going straight, and turn down the alley next to the little convenience store. The house at the end, the white one with the pretty garden. That was her house," the woman explained in detail. "Pretty garden, white house," I repeated to myself. "Thank you," I murmured. I got off at the indicated corner, and the town's air hit my face. Clean, quiet, very different from the image of a secluded, terrible road place that Michael had painted. I followed the directions, saw the store, turned into the alley, and walked on well-laid cobblestones flanked by tidy homes. At the end of the alley, I saw it, and my feet planted themselves on the ground. It was not a house in ruins, nor was it surrounded by cement bags and dust. It was beautiful, much nicer than the modern but cozy house Michael and I lived in back in the city. The ivory-colored walls were impeccable, the large windows had polished wood frames. Out front, a near-perfect garden. Carpet-like lawn, roses, orchids, and jasmine in bloom. There were no piles of sand, no stacked bricks, No noise from contractors, not even a speck of dust. I felt sick. 7 years of stories about collapsing roofs and weakened structures, and what was in front of me was a magazine photo. Michael hadn't hidden a ruin out of shame. He was hiding a perfect house. Why didn't he want me to see it? Why all the fake renovation receipts? What had he really spent that construction money on? With trembling hands, I reached into my inner pocket and closed my fingers around the cold metal of the large key. I pushed open the gate, which wasn't even locked, and walked up to the porch. My heart was pounding so hard I worried it could be heard from inside. I inserted the key into the front door. It turned smoothly, as if recently oiled. The lock gave way with an almost friendly click. The door was unlocked, but I couldn't push it open. My legs felt like concrete. I stood at the threshold of a new life or a nightmare. What was I going to find? An empty house, remnants of illness, or something much worse? At that moment, a voice made me jump. "Are you looking for someone, dear?" The voice came from the side. I turned sharply. Behind a hedge separating the house from the one next door, an older woman in a patterned house dress and a simple scarf on her head was looking at me curiously. She was holding pruning shears. I swallowed. I couldn't run. "Yes," I stammered. "I'm looking for Rose Miller's house." The woman frowned with sympathy. Oh, the poor soul. This was her house. It's been over a month since she passed away. "And who are you?" I debated for a second about the lie I had used on the shuttle, but I knew it wouldn't get me anywhere. "My name is Amina. I'm Michael's wife." The woman's jaw seemed to drop. She almost let the shears fall. "Michael's wife?" she repeated, her voice rising with surprise. "Yes. Is something wrong?" The neighbor shook her head, still stunned. "Goodness me. I'm Mrs. Evans, dear. Your next-door neighbor. Call me Teresa." Teresa quickly crossed the lawn, stepping over the low hedge. "My God, you're the one Michael always said couldn't come, because you were too fragile. Come. Let's sit on my porch for a minute." She made me sit in a small, simple chair on her neat porch, next to a planter full of vibrant geraniums. She kept looking at me, her eyes full of confusion and pity. "So you're Michael's wife, but you didn't know your mother-in-law was gone?" He told everyone here the same thing. The house was being remodeled, and he couldn't bring his wife from the city, because she was too sensitive and had an issue with dust and travel. I closed my eyes for a moment. The lie was expanding, encompassing everything. And what was Rose sick with? I asked, my voice raw. Teresa's face darkened. "Well, that's the strange thing. She was fine. She used to come to community meetings with me. Then suddenly, about 2 years ago, she disappeared, as if she had been locked away. We, her neighbors, tried to visit her, but Michael always showed up just in time. Mom is resting, she can't see anyone. The doctor says she shouldn't catch anything. Always excuses. And he put up this high fence you see now. It wasn't here before. He said it was for security, but it looked like a prison. I felt an icy emptiness in my stomach. So she died of illness? Teresa sighed. According to Michael, a kidney problem. But no one saw her sick. We just suddenly heard she had died. He arranged the burial quickly, without disturbing too many people. He said he didn't want to break the news to his wife, because you were too fragile to handle the blow. Tears filled my eyes. Michael hadn't just excluded me from the burial. He had used me as his excuse. And the famous house renovation? I dared to ask, pointing to the impeccable garden and freshly painted walls. Teresa let out a short, cynical laugh. Renovation? Oh honey, that house has been perfect for years. Michael finished the main work maybe 5 years ago. He poured good money into it, it's gorgeous inside. But he told everyone in town to keep quiet about it. He said if word got back to you, you'd get jealous of the house and wouldn't want to live with him in the city anymore, or something foolish like that. We just figured he didn't want to file the permits and was avoiding the town tax office. He was building a dream house, and he told me it was a ruin, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The real tragedy is Rose, Teresa continued, lowering her voice. She was just trapped in there. I'm telling you, I felt like she was a prisoner. I would call over the hedge, and sometimes, very softly, I'd hear a little voice that wasn't hers. A child's voice. I swear I heard a little boy laughing once or twice. I went pale. I thought I was imagining it, Teresa hurried to say, but it happened several times. In the morning, the house was always silent. We just knew Rose was inside, and Michael would come and go in his nice car. The neighbor looked at me with pity. I didn't know you didn't know any of this, dear. I slowly shook my head, tears now streaming down. I knew nothing. Teresa sighed. I don't want to pry any further, but that house is your mother-in-law's property. You have every right to go inside. If anything happens, scream. I'll be right here. She left me alone in front of the half-open door. I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, took a deep breath, and pushed. The door swung open silently. The first thing that greeted me was a rush of cold air, too cold, as if the air conditioning was on max, mixed with a strange scent. Expensive jasmine air freshener, a background of disinfectant, and a heavy, stale odor of an ill-ventilated room. I was in the living room, and this did not look like a country home at all. The floor was shiny, light-colored marble. The sofa was huge, white leather, and a gigantic flat-screen TV hung from a wall clad in wood panels. Everything looked brand new, polished, almost unused. It was, without a doubt, much more luxurious than the house in the city where I lived. Then my eyes focused on the living room's main wall. It was covered with dozens of framed photographs of Michael. Michael in his suit, Michael on a yacht, Michael shaking hands with businessmen. A narcissistic shrine to a life that had never involved me. I staggered through the living room and reached the dining room, where an impeccable table for 8 sat with an empty vase in the center. Then I entered the kitchen. It was a showroom kitchen. Built-in stovetop, modern electric oven, a double-door refrigerator, all gleaming. On the refrigerator door, something broke that perfection. A child's drawing held up by a magnet. I walked closer. It was a crayon drawing. 3 figures holding hands under a smiling sun. A tall adult, a long-haired woman, and a small figure between them. Above the man's head, in clumsy child's writing, was a misspelled but clear word. Daddy. The air caught in my throat. Daddy. Not uncle. Not Mr. Daddy. I backed away from the kitchen and walked down the inner hallway. There were several doors. I opened the first. A tidy guest room with no signs of use. The second. An impeccable bathroom smelling of eucalyptus. The third door, at the end of the hall, was locked. By the size, I assumed it was the master bedroom, the one that should have been Rose's. I pulled the keyring from my pocket, isolated the smallest key, and tried it with trembling fingers. It took me 3 attempts to hit the keyhole, but finally it turned. The click of the lock sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I pushed the door open. The room hit me like a physical blow. It was the same size as the living room, but the furniture was sparse and medical grade. A hospital bed. A bedside table piled with empty jars, syrups, blister packs of pills. Boxes of medicine. A small oxygen tank lay on the floor with the hose detached. This had been Rose's prison. I felt a wave of rage and pity. Trapped here, in an expensive but suffocating room. The woman I had wanted to know as a mother had spent her final years. My God, Rose, I whispered, tears rolling down my cheeks. But that was only half the room. The space was huge and seemed divided into 2 areas. The bed area was grim, almost institutional. I took a few steps more, wiping my eyes, into the other half. When I looked up, I almost fainted. The wall opposite the bed wasn't white. It was painted a soft pastel blue, and covered from top to bottom in photos. Not the same narcissistic photos from the living room. These were family photos. In all of them was Michael, but this time, he wasn't alone. In every image, he was embracing a young, pretty woman with long, loose hair, without a hijab. He was smiling radiantly. Beside them was a boy of about 4 or 5, with eyes and a smile identical to Michael's. There were photos at the beach, with the boy on Michael's shoulders. Photos at a birthday party, with both adults kissing the boy's cheeks. Photos taken in the very kitchen I had just seen. Michael had been living a complete, parallel life here, with another woman and another son, Bruno, all paid for with the money he claimed to be investing in his mother's house. And Rose, the legitimate owner of the house, had been forced to witness it, locked up next to that blue wall. I stumbled back to the door frame. I sank onto the cold hallway floor, unable to cry, unable to breathe. I don't know how long I stayed there, 10 minutes, an hour. Time lost its shape. Finally, the shock began to give way, replaced by something hard and sharp that settled in the center of my chest. Rage. This was no longer just marital betrayal. It was indescribable cruelty. He had turned his mother's home and her old age into a stage for his double life. With clumsy but determined movements, I stood up. I wasn't going to pass out or run away. I had opened this door. Now I had to see it through to the end. I went back into the room. I looked at the empty bed, imagining Rose there, breathing with difficulty, listening to laughter from the other side of the blue wall. Then I looked at the photos. They were so numerous and so obscene in their happiness that they made me nauseous. In an impulse, I started tearing them off one by one. I didn't care that the frames crashed to the floor. I needed evidence. I pulled out the desk key and unlocked a small, old-fashioned cabinet next to the bed. I found a few envelopes of cash, a prayer book, and a worn school notebook. I opened the notebook. It wasn't a school subject, it was a diary. The first page had a date from 3 years earlier. And a shaky but neat script, the handwriting of an older woman. Today Michael told me he's going to renovate the house. He wants me to spend my final years comfortably. God bless him. What a good son. I love him very much. I swallowed, turning the page. Months later, another entry. The house looks beautiful, much nicer than I imagined, but it's strange. Michael had a very high fence put up, and he says I shouldn't go out alone, that I might fall. I obey. He knows best. The entries became more spaced out. 2 years ago. Michael brought a young woman and a baby today. He says they are friends from work, and that they need a place to stay while their house is finished. They are very loud. The baby cries a lot, but I'm happy Michael has friends. They are using the big room in the back. The next entries became increasingly desperate. Rose wasn't allowed to leave the room. She was brought food on a tray. She could hear the noises, the footsteps, the laughter, and the crying of the child. My husband's son, on the other side of the wall. She even heard the workers finishing the room that Michael had described as a ruin, but which was, in fact, the love nest for his other family. I flipped to the last pages, the last entry. I'm so weak. The medicine error. Change in character focus/perspective. I need more of it. I told Michael, but he was busy. I hope he remembers. Tell Amina I love her. I want her to know. The writing trailed off. I closed the notebook. It had been Rose's silent witness. It was the key to his web of lies. I opened the front door, walked out into the open air, and breathed in the town's sunshine as if it were the first gulp of air in days. I held the notebook and the photos so tightly my knuckles turned white. I knew exactly what I had to do. I crossed instantly to Teresa's house. There was no time for courtesies. I need your help, I said with an icy calm. Teresa read in my eyes that I had seen something terrible, and she led me inside. She sat me down in her humble but cool living room. What did you find, dear? She asked anxiously. I looked straight ahead. I was poisoned by his lies, but Rose. They killed her, I whispered. Teresa paled. I recounted everything. The luxurious house, the hidden room, the medical supplies, the photographs, the diary. The notebook was the final evidence. Michael had not only imprisoned his sick mother to have an expensive life with another woman and a son in her own house, but he had neglected her medical needs until she died. I have to call the police, Teresa said, horrified. No, I stopped her. First, we call the lawyer. Mr. Thompson. I called the law office. Mr. Thompson answered immediately. His tone was professional. I identified myself and told him, in a controlled, emotionless voice, that the official story of Rose Miller's death was a lie. I told him what I had found, and that I believed Michael was guilty of neglect resulting in death, and fraudulent use of the estate. The lawyer listened in stunned silence. Mrs. Miller. Amina, he finally said. If everything you say is true, Michael is facing serious charges. It is true, I confirmed. And I know where he is right now. I quickly explained Michael's business trip, and the existence of the other town, New Haven. Michael is not traveling anywhere. He has another house in the next town over, in New Haven. A big new house for that woman he lives with. Every time he tells me he's on a business trip, he's there. And when he tells her he's going to the city, he comes back to me. He's a two-faced snake, I summarized crudely. The silence on the other end was even longer. The attorney was putting the puzzle together. This is better, in a sense, he finally said. We can catch him in flagranti. Mrs. Miller, Amina, Mrs. Evans, lock the door and wait. Don't go out. When I arrive, we'll go to New Haven together and flush him out of his den. We'll be waiting for you, I replied. I hung up and sank onto the sofa with the notebook in my lap. Teresa looked at me with a mixture of horror and admiration. You are a strong woman, dear, she murmured. I don't know, Teresa, I replied, not taking my eyes off the notebook. I just know I want justice for Rose. The 5 hours of waiting felt eternal. I didn't eat a bite, though Teresa insisted. I sat stiffly, reading Rose's diary over and over, memorizing every word. When the horn of a car sounded outside, I knew it wasn't the police, it was the lawyer. Teresa opened the door. Standing on the threshold was Mr. Thompson, flushed with heat and contained anger, his suit jacket in his hand, his shirt sleeves rolled up. Behind him were two burly men in plain clothes. Mrs. Miller, Amina, the lawyer greeted me. We're here. We've already contacted the town police. These gentlemen are detectives. I nodded. What's the plan? We're going to New Haven right now. First, we want to see with our own eyes what's going on there. I recommend you stay behind. I'm coming, I interrupted him. I need him to see me. I need him to know it was my hand that brought down his lie. The attorney looked into my eyes. He saw not fragility, but unexpected composure. All right, he conceded. But you stay behind us. The drive to New Haven was short, barely 20 minutes. I rode in the lawyer's car with Teresa. The officers followed in the other vehicle. No one spoke. I looked out the window at the fields, the scattered houses, the sky beginning to turn orange. When we arrived, Teresa pointed. It's that one, the one with the low fence and the toys in the yard. Michael's house there was the opposite of Rose's. It was not hidden, it was advertised. Modern gray walls with orange accents, a front yard with swings, tricycles scattered around, and two children's bicycles leaning against the porch. Michael was there. He was standing on the lawn laughing, pushing a swing with a boy who I recognized instantly as his son Bruno. The other woman, Vera, was sitting on the porch, sipping a drink and watching them with a smile. It was a perfect, idyllic family scene, playing out in the late afternoon sun. The car stopped quietly on the gravel, and Michael turned, still smiling. When he saw me, the smile froze, then dissolved. For a second, he looked like he was seeing a ghost. The swing swung back and nearly hit Bruno, who shrieked in surprise. Amina, Michael whispered, his voice dry. On the porch, Vera sat up, confused. Who is that, Michael? She asked, not understanding. Michael didn't answer. I stopped in front of him, separated only by the swing set. Bruno looked up at me curiously, with those eyes that were a copy of his father's. You said, I began, my voice clear and cold, that you were on a business trip. Far away. Michael's face went from pale to a sickly green. He tried to take a step toward me. Amina, please, he was interrupted by Mr. Thompson and the two detectives walking onto the lawn. Mr. Michael Miller, Mr. Thompson stated formally. I am here in my capacity as legal counsel for the estate of Rose Miller. These officers are here in connection with an investigation into the circumstances of your mother's death and the fraudulent use of her assets. We advise you to remain silent and cooperate. Michael's world collapsed in that instant. He didn't say a word. The detectives took his arms, and I watched as the man I married was led away in handcuffs from his other life. Vera, screaming, ran towards the scene, but Teresa, standing beside me, held me steady. The police investigation confirmed everything. Michael had confined Rose in a single, isolated room, hidden from his second family, while he spent the renovation money on building a luxurious life next door. The medical note I found was confirmed. He had neglected to refill the life-saving medication for her acute kidney condition, leading to her death. Michael Miller was prosecuted and later sentenced to a long term in a federal penitentiary for fraud, elder abuse, and involuntary manslaughter due to criminal neglect. I never went back to the house in the city. The divorce was finalized quickly. I stayed in Hope Springs, in Rose Miller's beautiful, perfected house. I kept the perfect kitchen, the beautiful garden, and the polished floors, but I changed everything else. The shrine of narcissistic photos was gone. The cold air conditioning was turned off. The high prison-like fence came down, replaced by a low, well-maintained hedge. The front door was now open most of the day, letting in the town air and the children's laughter. I, Amina, in pastel-colored tunics, now tend to the flowers in the garden. Jasmine, roses, geraniums. My peace is here, in the house of the woman I didn't get to know in life as I wished, but whom I now honor in every corner. Inside, the smell of disinfectant and confinement disappeared long ago. In the living room, no trace of Michael's photos remains. I burned them all. In their place hang calligraphies with verses and phrases that invite reflection and peace. The biggest change was in Rose's old room. I transformed the former prison into a community space. I removed the hospital equipment and installed wooden shelves full of books. The town children started coming in barefoot or in sandals. They sat on cushions, looked through stories, read aloud, and shared laughter. Above the doorway of that room, I had a simple but beautiful wooden plaque installed with hand-engraved letters. Rose Miller Memorial Library. Knowledge is light. Every time I pass that sign, I feel something inside me settle a little more. One afternoon, Teresa crossed the hedge with a tray of jasmine tea and freshly made fritters. "It's getting cool, dear. Come inside, you'll catch a cold," she said with a smile. I returned the smile. A clean smile that sprang from within me. "In a moment, Teresa. I like listening to the children from here," I replied, looking toward the open library from which children's voices were reading in chorus. I had fulfilled Rose's request. Michael was paying for what he had done, and that house, which had once been a silent hell, had become a place where children sought stories and light. I, Amina, was finally breathing in peace. And every page turned in that small library was, in its own way, a prayer for the woman who had asked for justice from the final pages of a school notebook. Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. If it resonated with you, give it a like, comment on what touched you the most, and be sure to mention where you're from. Subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more stories to come.